Hello and welcome to Awaken the Healer Within. I'm your host, Jason Prawl, and joining me today, I've got Guy Ferdman. He is one half of the brothers duo who speakers and founders of Satori Prime. They have a combined 36 plus years of coaching together in the fields of business, leadership, personal development, and spiritual growth. And their application of psychology and neuroscience combined with ancient practices of energetics gives them a very unique approach to problem solving and transforming lives. So that's really why I brought Guy on today to discuss some of these universal aspects of the human experience, and how they have really learned to share their wisdom with their clients and their people that they coach on how to get unstuck, how to move forward, and really how to unleash sort of this life that I think we're all wanting to live. So with that, Guy, thanks for joining me today.
Absolutely, man. So happy to be here. Excited to be
Yes.
here.
Yeah.
hmm
So we've known each other for a couple of years now, and I would say we've gotten pretty close. We're in the same physical geographic area, and we're also kind of toying in the same areas of our own personal development,
Sure.
as well as kind of sharing some of our own unique wisdoms. And so I'm excited to dive into this today. And as we were chatting before, we have no map for where we're going, and I love that because I know you're one of those guys in the space that shares from the heart, that really allows for the emergence of things to come forward, even with a template in mind. So the only thing I really wanted to drill down on is this idea of getting stuck or feeling stuck, and how we move forward. So I guess if we want to start there, what does it mean to feel stuck? I mean, I think we can all recognize that feeling within ourselves of not knowing what to do or where to go or how to get answers. But how do you guys even begin to broach that concept with the people that you coach?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, stuck is it's a big idea. So let's just, depending on the listener here, right? If you can kind of pick an area of life, so you're not just listening to this as a bit of information, but instead like mapping it on to some area of your life right now, because that'll make it more real and tangible for you. And first, I want to say like this is not a conversation about necessarily having an answer, but more about let's have an exploration through our minds, through insights, and through looking at how do we apply some of what we know about the brain, modern psychology, and some ancient spiritual sciences, and combining all of that to not just change the way that we think, but also how we approach really any difficulty in life. And so it's funny that we're in this moment. I just told Jason that we do a training for our community once a week, live training. And the headline I did for the training this week was how to get unstuck when you're stuck. So uh, we did not plan for that at all. So I want to even put that out there right away as a little bit of a teaser on something that maybe we're kind of missing in our society, which is noticing in big parts a orchestration that's occurring. Obviously, there's a lot of faiths and religions and whatnot, and people speak about God, and I don't hesitate to use the word God because of I don't think that there's something that unifies all of us. I hesitate because of the dogmatic nature, and it has a lot of weight. So if I say words like divine, spirit, energy, it's kind of interchangeable for me, and I think that's what we kind of want to allude to here is that a lot of us, certainly in the Western minded kind of spirituality or psychology, have been trained to deal with stuckness in a very particular way. And really, that's just all through the world of doing. Right. So it's like I'm in the situation. So again, just to kind of backtrack for you guys, like an area of life that you may want to consider putting under a small magnifying glass right now is like your health, intimate relationships or business relationships, your health, personal health, right? And then your health around finances and abundance and stuff like this.
I say money's a big one, right? I think
Money, the biggest one.
almost everybody that I know has some relationship issue, so to speak, with money, or maybe not even an issue, but something they're trying to improve with
Correct.
their finances. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like fundamentally, at least in today's society, right, the how much money you have is often derived to how safe you feel. So when they ask people, like, what's your number one correlate for feeling happy? People respond in overwhelming numbers as control. So it's like the amount of control they feel they have is the amount of joy that they feel they have. And it's funny because spirituality and deep practices will have you constantly looking at giving up control and surrendering to what's occurring as a hallmark for actually creating more joy and energy flow in your life and stuff like this. And so we have these like this push and pull that's been happening in society about how we've been conditioned to believe reality is, how to deal with our biology, how to deal with our thoughts. And most of that is in like this like management and control thing. And as Jason mentioned, like I've been in my personal practice since the age of 19, so almost 20 years ongoing straight. I've coached tens of thousands of people. I've invested well over $500,000 in experiences, educations, teachers, different types of schools, things that Jason's aware of as well. So, you know, like I run the gamut, and like most healers, what I'm really working on is healing here, right? And so people are generally, even in the coaching sphere, you'll learn whatever someone has mastery, and the only reason they would have mastery in that space is they have personal interest in healing that within themselves. So you know, a really good coach is somebody who's walked that path before you. And I think it's really actually out of integrity to teach things that you've read in a book and haven't embodied yourself. So we kind of towed that line of being very careful about not teaching things that, you know, maybe we've been practicing for a few years, but don't feel fully embodied in that. So just to kind of take it back to the stuckness conversation, you know, just kind of pick an area for you. And it's not like you have to bring a lot of mental aptitude to it. What I would invite you to is to kind of just naturally let yourself feel what it's like to feel stuck in that place. And it probably is not that far away from you. And then not just feel like an emotion, right? Because an emotion is already a judgment that the mind has made about some kind of sensation in your body. So you're like, oh, I feel angry about that. Okay, well, that's the mind. Because really what we have is the diagram we paint is like you have kind of this energetic, sensational body that's happening down here. It is getting a response, right? It has like a response stimuli from your environment. And the mind is like this mechanism, almost like a computer terminal, that's looking down at sensation and interpreting what that means, right? And then so it has thoughts about the emotion, which is just naming it a sensation something. Doesn't necessarily mean that that's what you're experiencing, but that's what the mind has been conditioned to believe. So for example, if you were a little boy, little girl, and you're frustrated, and mommy said, oh, I'm noticing you're angry, and you're like, oh, this is anger, you will have mapped a certain sensation to your body about anger. But I can't be sure that the way that I experience anger in my body is the way that Jason experiences it in his body. And most likely it's not that way, right? So again, all these conditioned interpretations. And so just to kind of begin the conversation here, it's like where we seem to be at the hall of society is that if I'm stuck, if I'm challenged by something, let me not go inside and mediate and get connected to my own experience, but I need to shift something outside of myself. I need to take some specific action. Maybe I'm not good enough to take that action yet, so I got to take this class or read this book or talk to my friends or talk to a teacher in some way so that I can understand how to quote unquote get better and take better action. And so if you look at most of where we are right now, even with, again, at the grand scale of society, it's everyone trying to derive or find some level of safety so they feel safe enough to act. And the way that we do that mostly in society is we want people to think, act, and feel like us, right? And so nations do this, religions do this. And it's like, hey, if they think, act, and feel like us, I'll feel safe over here. And then like, we'll all somehow like unify. But, you know, is that really going to happen? It's unlikely that we're all going to start thinking and acting and feeling the same way about everything. So it really comes back to how does one develop, not through our action and through our results and achievement, this feeling of safety, or through money or whatever it might be, but really do the internal work so that the fundamental, like the foundation of who you are is a being that just feels safe. And so if you can kind of just like let your mind wander, because maybe where you are right now in your life, you never considered that what's underneath all these sensations, all these feelings, is a lack of safety, is that your system is constantly running these unconscious protocols, trying to grasp at creating more safety in your life. And so it's this very intelligent system that's developed all these things over millions of years of evolution. However, fundamentally, we haven't really found a way to stop suffering and to just create safety in our system. And it's like, what actually becomes possible for the individual? What becomes possible for the group or the greater whole, when where all of society derives every sensation from is this core and fundamental of just being safe. That could be a very different world, in my opinion.
Yeah, and kind of what comes to mind as you say all that is that that there is a place for action, right? But what
Yes.
I'm hearing is that what most of us are doing, and kind of what you kind of are coaching people to recognize or become aware of, is that generally the pattern is that we're experiencing this stuckness or this thing that we want to change, and the first place we go is outward and try to correct the world around us or organize the world around us in a way that's going to help us feel safe. And rather, there seems to be a new method or a better, a more effective way to get there, which is to first kind of go inward, and and maybe we can discuss how we get there, but come from a place of alignment or safety or security, and then take action from that point. Is that kind of what you're alluding to?
Yeah, and let's take this to like a scientific place, right? Because in spiritual communities, people will, again, we have this way of taking negative and positive, just those terminologies, and making negative bad and positive good. Again, this is conditioned into us. It's actually a biological phenomenon, not a spiritual one. I won't get into the contemplation of why I've come to that, but that's its own conversation. But if we just see as negative and positive as something like a duality that's necessary for our reality to exist inside of.
Right.
And so if we get rid of this concept of good and bad, there is this idea in spirituality that high vibe people are like crushing it in life and get everything they want. And these low vibrational people are like the murky ones. And while there's some truth in terms of the sensation that's experienced, I want to give this very scientific diagram. Like if you are looking at a frequency wave of a low vibration, right? So if you don't know what that looks like a bass, it's going to be these very long kind of waves, right? And so if we use the x-axis as like the time that one would experience something in a low vibration, right? So there's always peaks and troughs. Like nobody's devoid of peaks and troughs, right? But if we consider every peak and trough as like an experience that you're having in a low vibration, that timeline is a lot longer. Right. So for me to go from a peak, so like if you're someone who's depressed or sad or, like really angry or guilt or shame driven, these are what I would consider low vibration, so to speak. And anybody who's been stuck in that place, you're like, why is this experience lasting so long? It's like when you have heartbreak, you're like, I just want this to be over. Right. So that's just a way of kind of looking at how vibration works. Now, if I lift my vibration and I make it a high vibration, that waveform is like this. Got lots of peaks and troughs, very condensed together. And so at a high vibration, I'm going to go through many experiences very quickly. I'm going to go through my peaks and troughs, right? Like all over and over again. Now, again, if we look at it from a really logical place, when someone's going through many experiences over and over and over again, it's actually quite chaotic. Right. So it's like either you're on an ocean that's so flat that you're not moving at all, or you're on this just wild ride and scared for your life. There's too much happening. And so I would offer that there's a modulation, right? A wave modulation that we can get to that kind of evens the flow, where of course you are experiencing ups and downs, but it doesn't feel quite like a roller coaster. And that any experience that you're in that might be of a negative accord, you're not stuck there for a very, very long time. So again, if we approach problem solving through just trying to solve feeling safer through what we've done for many millennia, which is just through achievement. What doesn't change is these modulations, because you're still stuck in these different vibrations and that is because you're always going to the external world, which is too big for you to manage, too big for you to control, too big for you to really, that's like spitting into the ocean. Did you add some water to the ocean? You did, but it's like you're not making, gale force winds are not going to start because you decided to spit into the ocean. Right. So, but on the other way, like if you go into your system and you use its own divine intelligence through awareness practices that have been around for a very long time, and you start identifying this way of being with yourself and connecting to your own divine intelligence, you'll find that your body has an intelligence to repair itself spiritually and emotionally speaking and energetically speaking, the same way that it has intelligence to repair your finger when you cut it or when you break a bone in your body. Like you're not sitting there giving it feedback on what to do. There's a divine template that exists here that brings everything back towards a state of neutrality.
And so you're just organizing to that or aligning with that. Is that right?
Correct. Yeah. It's almost like our awareness, it is enough to notice something and then almost watch it like you're watching a movie, right? You're not when you're watching a movie, you're still very invested. You have the emotions and sensations and all these things, and you're very drawn in, but you're not telling the character what to do. You're not like, oh, he's angry right now, stop being
Well,
angry. Like you're
sometimes
not.
I do that, but
Yeah,
it
sure.
doesn't
Right?
work very well.
I get it, right? But yeah, you're absolutely right. We get like so pulled into the experience, but that's our lives too. We are the observer of what's happening in front of us, and our minds have been conditioned to get so pulled in that we think we can tell the characters what to do, and we can tell this character what to do. And so what I find is that the mind has one speed, and the body has a different speed.
Hmm.
This is kind of like a cruise liner. And if a cruise liner needs to make a turn, it's kind of slow and methodical, and it's got to be very careful and look around about what it's bumping into. Where the mind is like a speedboat, it can make these like lots of turns. But again, same kind of metaphor here. It's like one is using a lower vibration, one's using a higher vibration, and we can shift these vibrations. And in my experiences, if you want to manifest the life that is in alignment for you, okay. And notice I'm saying the life that's in a life that's in alignment for you, not a life that you think you're supposed to have.
Right.
It's a very different thing. Sometimes we get in alignment and we find out that we actually lose a lot of money, not earn a lot of money, because the money that was earned out of alignment. And now that vibration can no longer hold or sustain the money that was earned, because it's like you actually don't want that energy around you
It's
anymore.
almost like dirty money. It's like that thing that the place that you generated that wealth from, or that life from, or that even the relationships, right? Or that
Yeah.
job, you find yourself in a different place. And I think the jobs is a very common one, right? I can attest that I went through this myself. I went into engineering, mechanical engineering, and
Yeah.
10 years. I was pretty good at it because it fits my natural sort of essence and skill set. And I woke up one day, more or less, and it was a building sort of feeling, but I got to this tipping point and I said, no more. I can't do this. I feel like a fraud. I hate this. I am showing up. I don't like myself in this. Like I just wasn't showing up as the best version of myself. And
Yeah.
now looking back, I can actually say that the person I was that made those decisions to become an engineer, to follow that path, I was doing so from a wounded place, from a
Yeah.
limited perspective, from not this sort of center, this aligned version of myself. Now, I say that also with the recognition that there is a divine intelligence into how it all maps out, and I don't want to judge the experience. And,
Sure.
and yet, I do find myself today in a much different position with different perspectives that understands who the little boy was that was making those decisions all along. And so I think this is probably a very common one for many people to
Yeah.
recognize this, what you're talking about.
Yeah, and so to kind of go back to money, like we've worked with almost billionaires, like people who are extraordinarily wealthy, uh, and in many respects, they look like they've checked all of society's boxes for a happy life. Now, I could tell you those people show up at our doorstep not because they're ecstatic and they're like, "Oh my God, life is amazing." They're scared out of their wits usually, and the reason for that is because nothing internally has changed. The promise of the white picket fence, the family, the health, the money, the promise was you'll feel safe now. Like there's no worry. But I want you guys to notice that millionaires and billionaires don't stop consuming. They're not like, oh, I've hit $100 million. Like I'm good now, spiritually resolved. Let me go help society. They continue to consume. They continue to try to build more wealth because the one thing that hasn't changed is the money hasn't created a feeling of safety in their system. Oftentimes, it actually creates the amalgamation of a lack of safety because now they're afraid to lose the wealth, and so they live with the reality that they got to keep going because if they don't keep making more, there's some way that's gonna all go away, and so it's a very frightening place to be when what we've been conditioned to believe as bringing joy and safety into one's life does none of those things, and you're like, and now what?
Right. So that's what I wanted to point to.
Yeah.
That's a big thing that you mentioned, right? And I've never been there personally, but I can kind of imagine getting to this point of thinking that reality is such that if I continue to do these things, then I'll get to this point of feeling safe, feeling good, feeling aligned, feeling connected, feeling all these things that I think we're all kind of seeking or
Sure.
wanting in our lives, and then getting to this point and at some point having this massive recognition of, oh my God, this didn't work. And if this didn't work, I'm screwed. Like
That's right.
there's almost nowhere to turn. I can see that being a very scary, confusing, and helpless place to be, even though the amount of resource on sort of the human level is virtually infinite for that type of an individual.
Yeah, I worked with this guy Jay. I won't use his last name for a long time. In a weird way, he's kind of like the grandfather of online marketing. And at that time, he was doing like $600,000 a month. And he's expressed to me like the day where that started happening, he was sitting at a park, laying on the grass, watching the clouds, as one of the scariest days of his entire life,
Mm.
because there was zero fulfillment. Like all this trauma from his childhood, like nothing was resolved. And so the everything that had built around him, this is literally a giant culture he had built that he was fundamentally at the center at, almost lacked integrity because it was all built and spoken to and created for other people. The same idea that you're going to get to such and such in your life if you build all this stuff. And it's like, that's kind of the lie, right? Like it doesn't have integrity. We cannot stuff enough consumerism or things into our bodies to make this system feel safe. And so I say this because number one, for the amount of time I've been in the work, and it's like I haven't figured it all out, and I'm not, like living in constant state of bliss. That's, I think, an irrational idea. I think even when we think of enlightened people, we think of them as people have so much compassion that there's no anger anymore. And I would offer that enlightenment is more like everything has been so integrated and so accepted that anger arises, but it fluidly moves out of the system as quickly as it arises. And so
for the anger, right?
That's right. Yeah. And so for the untrained eye, it just seems like this being of infinite compassion when it's like, no, they're just such a fluid network, like a fluid terminal. Nothing gets stuck in the system. Where in like a system like mine or Jason's, like an experience comes in and it's like, and so there's a tightening and there's literally a stuckness in the system. And then the mind starts dealing with the stuckness. And it's only because that's our next opportunity to observe what's stuck, let it heal itself, and then create a more fluid system. And so for the last 5 years, while I've been involved in this level of energetic work, like that's what I've noticed is a level of fluidity. Things arise and dissipate from my system, and sometimes in minutes, sometimes in seconds, sometimes in hours, sometimes in days. But those experiences may have lasted months prior to, or me mulling it over or thinking about it or trying to plan on it. And so over time, I've been able to build a capacity. That's what we do with our clientele, is we enable them to kind of stop operating from just a conditioned mind and really come out into what we call as like a more subtle awareness or awake style of awarenesses. And this allows for just, I mean, it's hard to describe what happens to people because spontaneous healing could be certainly part of it, but it's like suddenly they see everything in their life shift around their finances or their health. Things that weren't moving were moving. I had a client who was overweight most of his life, probably his whole of life, and something cleared from his system, and within a 2-month period he lost 62 pounds. And not because he suddenly did something different than he had done before, although kind of there's a naturally arising spontaneous action that's no longer based on achievement. If suddenly you're like, oh, I don't want to drink, or suddenly, hey, like a walk seems like an opportunity. It just kind of changes the goggles. But what I want to say is like, for a system like his, and we're not all built the same, or people who might be watching this and are like really dealing with weight loss, you have to realize there's an intelligence in the body that we're not honoring. Over millions of years, this intelligence has protected you from when you were a little child, some of it from before you remember, before cognition, before language, much of it actually before that. And it derived certain responses. So for those of you guys who are like super sensitive beings, maybe, right, like just shot in the dark here, sorry if I'm triggering you, you had a mom or a dad who was like highly abusive. And so you had to become ultra sensitive because you had to know when mom or dad walked up the stairs to the porch of the house, your system had to ping their system and say, uh-oh, are they drunk today? Are they going to come and hit me?
Well, and this can be physically abusive, right? Or mentally or
Sure.
emotionally abusive too, right? And I think
Yeah.
that's I would say perhaps a more common one is this mental emotional abuse that may not even be recognized as abuse until you really identify how it was playing out. And to some degree, I think a lot of our parents don't even mean to be abusive. I know if I look back on my behavior as a human up to this point, there's been many times I've been abusive mentally or emotionally to people. And I wasn't consciously aware that I was as abusive as I was perhaps. And so
Correct.
these things can be very hidden in our own experience sometimes, but particularly as little ones, I think as you're mentioning, we are naturally more sensitive in that way. And I love that you said this, that we all have different systems. We're all individuals, and some people may just have a constitution where they are just highly, highly sensitive beings comparatively to some of the rest of us.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And just to kind of put a bow on that, so like that individual might have created hypersensitivity because you have to know if something threatening was coming your way and how to protect yourself. Maybe it was getting out of the house or like hiding, right? Like the way that a child would deal with it. For others, maybe you were dealing with so much energy in the body that after a while it was just like the body literally can't do it anymore. So it freezes and locks, and now you feel numb. For a person who's overweight, it's like there was it usually comes from like they're getting no positive feedback, and so they go so internal that the energy body actually starts pushing out, and so the physical body basically mirrors what the energetic body is doing. And so they start using food to also soothe the system, but also to create more space between them and the world. Now if you take that kind of person and you put them in a weight loss program and they start rapidly losing weight, and go to look at people like who've done The Biggest Loser, in hordes they get back the weight. Why? Because after the euphoria of the weight loss ends, what begins is the threat of survival in their system. It's opening up at the same time. And so the way that that system knows to deal with that threat to their survival, to not feeling safety, is to start eating again, to soothe the system and to build that space. And then they get to a certain place and they can relax, right? So we're all dealing with that in our own way because our systems are very intelligent. And if we don't start with acknowledging this intelligence first, where most psychology will have you try to actually work against that intelligence, it's where people don't make a lot of headway with it, at least in my experience. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that, and it's again. So what you're pointing to is there's an intelligence in the extra weight that's there, and not only an intelligence in the tissues of the body, but in the entire energetic system of the being itself. And you're reminding me of a couple stories that I know about people that experience sexual trauma,
Mm,
particularly females,
yes.
and they will unconsciously, subconsciously put on weight to deter that male energy from coming in and attracting more of that, right? So in other words, it's like this wisdom of trying to become ugly,
Yes.
because they don't want to experience that insatiable, that crazy pain that no one should want to experience, right? So there's a number of examples of this, and I want to point to one of my own recently, as we all navigated 2020 and the very crazy year that was with COVID and lockdowns and policies and things. And there was a period that we were, especially here in California, we were kind of trapped. We were all inside and stuck. And we couldn't go to the beaches, and it was this very weird dynamic. And I've never been one to really be obese or overweight in a huge way, but although my weight has naturally fluctuated, but I noticed that in those months in particular, I was eating from a place that I wasn't typically used to eating from, which is I was eating to feel connected, to feel soothed, to feel
Mm-hmm.
nourished,
Mm-hmm.
because there was something in my day-to-day experience that was missing. I was missing the interaction with people. And I noticed that at one point, and I'd gained a little bit of weight, 5, 10 pounds, the COVID-19, so to speak.
Yeah.
And I noticed, wow, like this is interesting. I'm actually eating from a different place than I would like to be eating from. And so I just want to kind of speak to that, and perhaps you can share, if you're willing to be vulnerable, some of your own experiences, perhaps not with weight, but with whatever it might be that you've noticed some patterns that you run typically in your experience.
Sure. Yeah. And just to Jason's point, like it's like we're all trying to downregulate our nervous system, right? But we're mostly doing it again through these conditioned responses like alcohol and food. Like if you've ever go to a dinner party with a group of friends, and I'm an anxious type of person, right? So when I am around a large group, even of people that I know very well, I feel anxiety in my system. Now, how do I temper that anxiety? Well, everyone always sets out the plates in the kitchen with all the hors d'oeuvres and stuff. And I don't know about you guys, but 9 times out of 10, if I go to a dinner party, everyone's in the kitchen. Why? Right? Like, why is it that even when you don't have food in your fridge or your pantry, you will get up from the couch over and over again and open up the refrigerator or go to the pantry and walk over there and open it again? Like new food is going to suddenly appear. Like, oh, maybe I didn't realize I can mix the ketchup with the mustard and put on a cracker this time. Like,
When I
right?
was younger,
Yeah.
I would say I was a social drinker. So we'd go out to the bars, and like there was something in me that was like, again, to that anxious point. It's like,
Yeah.
give me a beer in my hand so that I can do this thing
Yeah.
orally, right? While it makes me feel safe around all these people.
That's right. Liquid courage. Right. And so, and the first thing a child learns is how to soothe through the mouth, right? Through the sucking and this like that. So it's like we like to think of like adults as something separate from children. Like there's you do your childhood thing and then you do your adult thing, but really it's we're conditioning the children out of the adult,
Mm.
right? Because there's really no such thing as an adult. There's just larger children that
We're just big
we
babies.
yeah, we're basically like large babies with the same exact insecurities and things that happened to us when we were little. And again, it's because we've structured society in a specific way that's like, hey, you win the game when it's like this and this. But it's like, think about how many other ways this game could have been played. I mean, it's hard to imagine because we're so conditioned into the game that we're playing, but like society is built a certain way. Like this planet could have looked millions of different ways than it does right now with human intervention. But again, I got to say that there's like a divine intelligence to how things arise, to the challenges that we're facing interpersonally on the planet as a species. And this is to me just kind of how it goes. So to go back to like what Jason was asking, like I have dealt with like inflammatory expression, and that's a really nice way of saying like anger most of my life. I remember from and again, this is so interesting because what I can remember is the response. I don't remember what began the response, but I have like a few early memories, which is walking. I was born in Israel. I was walking my mom down the street and hearing cat calls. My mom was a very young mother and feeling like extreme aggression towards men because of like the lack of safety I felt. And then I remember being very attuned to my father who would say things to my mom that would emotionally hurt her that felt like they were directed at me because you were hurting my mother. Right. So I started physically protecting my mom from my dad, even though my dad was never physically abusive towards my mom. But I mean, like I would tackle my dad and like jump on him. And I remember I wasn't trying to hurt him. I was trying to kill him.
Yeah.
Like that was the level of rage. So I can remember I have memories of like 4, 5, 6 years old, probably a little bit after doing that as well. And so like that model of the world never changed for me. I've never felt fully sedated or safe around a group of men. I am a protector of women. Women on a regular basis will report that they feel very safe around me and stuff like that because that's what's in my system. And I've spent 20 years and all this money invested in coaching all these people basically to find some peace, some semblance of peace in my life because there's so much of this like agitation that occurs in my system. And I will say like through mindset work, I was able to shift so much of my focus and paradigm and stuff. But like that central thing of not feeling safe really didn't even start moving until I started doing more energetic awareness practices. And so I don't think that I wouldn't obfuscate one for the other because I think like everything else, things require balance in life. And so just to do awakening work, awareness work, to use Ken Wilber's models here, there's like the growing up path of waking up and there's the waking up path of like enlightenment. And so if you just focus on one or the other, you are basically working with one hand tied behind your back. So you may have noticed that like there's really spiritually enlightened people, but then we read like news headlines where they're doing things completely out of integrity. That person is really lacking the growing up work that which really came with the advent of psychology. That's
It's kind of the human work, right? Like the
the human work.
developmental psychology.
That's right. That's right. Many of you guys may be doing your spirituality going like, I need to escape this place. There's suffering here. So let me eat the mushrooms. Let me do the ayahuasca ceremonies. I certainly was doing it that way because I'm like, fuck, there is a lot of suffering in this human body. I got to go over here. And what I realize now is like, yes, come out here, but like these lessons get to come all the way through the system so that we can be that spiritual entity in fully embodiment on this planet. And I truly believe that is the future of humanity, so to speak. Now, the one other wrinkle I want to throw in here, and this is why, again, why the energetic awareness practice is so important. I feel shame and guilt for the amount of anger and often sadness and despair that I sometimes feel, because when I look at my life, there's no correlation there to the degree that I experience it sometimes. And so it's very frightening to not be able to psychologically understand why I would feel that way. Do you get that? And so,
well, and sorry, let me pause right there because you're actually kind of circling back a little bit about the things you said earlier, which is that there's these internal feelings, this recognition of the way life feels or life seems, and then there's the outward representation that is very, very different, right? And so, and as you just pointed to, they don't seem to match, and this is where I think the confusing part is, and why it doesn't work to try to go fix the outside, even if it does match, because you're pointing to this idea that that they're two different worlds, and let's not mistake one for the other.
Yeah. Even if we take simple math, and we use the law of compounding, which if anybody's ever looked at those equations, it's striking like how things precipitate and grow. So they say that at any given second, there's about 1 million bits of data that a human being can be aware of, right? If we break it down to like computer code. And a human being on a regular basis notices at a low level of consciousness, which most of us are, I'm including myself in this, by the way, of about 8 to 16 bits per second of information that we actually capture. So 8 bits to 16 bits versus 1 million bits. Now at a higher state, like a really meditative alpha beta waves type states, it's up to 128 bits. Okay. That's like our maximum input. The rest of it is pretty much just conditioned thing, because I don't know if you guys know this, but the brain is the most caloric intensive organ that we have. And so it's also built a lot around efficiency. So the way that it creates efficiency without being overburdened is it actually uses memories to create the structures around you. So when you walk into a room, 95% of what you're seeing is not what's actually in that room. It's what your mind is projecting that was in that room before. And if you've ever walked into a room and something feels a little bit off and you're like, why does something look off in here? And it's like a painting was missing, because the mind is trying to project the painting, and and you're suddenly noticing, or maybe you notice you have a gray hair here, and you're like, when did that come in? That's been there for like months before you noticed it, right? The information is not getting in. So if you can imagine, we're basically lacking about 1 million bits of information per second. Now compound that over a lifetime. How much have you missed?
Right.
An unquantifiable number, right? Unquantifiable. So if that's the case, but we're all living with this certainty of what reality is and what we are, like I would throw that into question immediately. What I find is that we have this trauma, right? And then the body contracts because it's trying to protect itself. Like you're a young child, there's too much energy flow, it's contracting. And then that stuckness, it's almost like that gets stuck in time, and the identity is built around that part and then projects itself out to protect it, because your body's like, that was awful. I never want to experience that again. Like how many of you guys, again, I'm going to raise my hand. I know maybe you're raising your hand over there, but like you had that first heartbreak. Brutal. Like no child can be prepared for really having a broken heart. And your system is like, never again. We're not going to feel this again. And so you get in relationships, and the moment anybody gets too close, anxious, avoidant, you do your thing, right? And you push them away. You don't understand why. And now you experience some heartbreak, but it's nowhere near the way you experienced it when you were a kid. And it's because the identity made sure that doesn't get touched again. However, you are now backlogged on that energy, and you're always at the effect of trying to protect yourself from that. So in contrast,
it's nothing changed, and well, it didn't get better, let's just say, and perhaps we even added a layer of added protection along the way, and so we're kind of going in the wrong direction, so to speak.
Yeah, and so for those of you guys who are in the dating pool, and it's like you keep meeting the crazy girl, or you keep meeting the asshole guy, and it's like, well, at some point you got to own that the common denominator is not that you keep meeting the same people. It's like you're the common denominator, and there's a frequency and an energy you're carrying in your body, and other people are responding to that. Not only other people, but reality itself is responding to that. I like to think of reality as an organic hologram. Okay, so if you think of like a VR hologram, like we're using AI technology, that's a sort of consciousness that's creating a reality for us. But the reality that we experience through this terminal this is an organic computer, and so this is an organic reality. And it behooves me when people create programs for manifestation, because I'm like, what? Like everybody's manifesting. It's an insane predicament to try to tell people that you're not doing something that you're already doing. What you really want to make people aware of, in my opinion, is that everyone's manifesting. The real question is, what are you manifesting?
Right.
And if this reality that makes you feel so stuck is not relating, I mean, there's some relationship to your thoughts. And, I know people do their journaling and this and that, but again, it's like, why are you journaling? Is it because you're trying to feel safer? Why are you spinning your beads and saying all the Sanskrit over and over again? because you're trying to change something and feel safer. So you still haven't dealt with the core of what's going on, which is you're doing that for the same reason Jason described taking the drink or eating the food. And so for me, the actions that we take in life don't matter all that much. What really matters is the quality of the energy behind the action. If you really want to see something shift in your life, you got to concern yourself, not concern like, oh my God, this is bad, but like you got to get really intimate with what is the quality of the energy that's creating this action. And so if you're creating from a lack, safety, scarcity, no money, what I have found is energy is like a boomerang, or, energy begets energy. The energy you create from, it will create more of that. So if you're developing your business from a lack, even though you're making a lot of money, that money will make you feel more lack. Right. That's kind of what we were saying before.
This is great. This is great because what I'm hearing is that the action is neither good nor bad in and of itself. It's just the action. We often like to paint the action as good. In other words, I was doing my gratitude journal, and that's a good thing to do. Well, yeah, or I was meditating, and that's a good thing to do. And what you're saying or pointing to is that it's not a good or bad thing. It's just the thing. It's where are you coming from when you do it, right? So when you meditate, you can come from this place of trying to find safety, or as you mentioned earlier, trying to escape the suffering. And even that's not good or bad. It's just a recognition, right? And I love the way you say that. It's you become intimate with what's really here. And as you do that, I think, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I know you well enough that I could, on this point, that it's about not judging what's really showing up, right?
Yeah.
So if you're doing it from a place of lack, it's starting to gain an intimacy in a way that doesn't come with the judgment, that doesn't come with the criticism about how you're showing up, but rather a neutrality and even a compassion for where you're at, right? And one of our mutual friends, Andrew, who'll actually be on this summit as well, it constantly tells me, just be kind to yourself. Because that's a pattern that in my past was not typical. I was very hard on myself. I still am. I'm very judgmental, very critical, because that's a pattern that kept me safe. And something that came through one of my meditations was this sort of me talking to myself in my mind almost. It was like, don't be so hard on yourself.
Yeah.
But when you are, that's okay. Don't be so hard on yourself for being hard on yourself. Right.
Yeah.
So it's a funny thing, but we get into these loops of judgment and criticism and trying to find our way out. And really what you're kind of alluding to, I feel, is this relaxing and a noticing and a getting intimate with what's really here.
Yeah. And so I hear the people going, but, you don't know my life circumstances, but you haven't met my parents. And I hear that. I really do. Right. Like,
because there is a truth to that, right? Like,
there is a truth to that. Like, I don't want to say people haven't been victimized. Like, some people have been horribly victimized. Like, Jason talked about rape and stuff like that. And I too, I've had that observation through coaching many women who have been raped, that they will, their bodies will change and will try to protect themselves and stuff like that. But what I want to offer here is that up until about 60 years ago, maybe even less, the premonition about raising a child was the same as breaking an animal, right? It was like, and even today, there's a shift in paradigm about how to break a horse because of the psychological impact. And people who really know horses know these are very, very sensitive, complicated creatures that you can have incredible relationships with. And so suddenly it's like breaking the horse is like, whoa, what are we doing here to these poor animals? But that's what we were told. That's what our parents were told, because that's what was done to them. It was about obedience. Don't step out of line. Do what I tell you, right? And so the child's will literally had to be broken. And so any semblance of connecting to yourself in order to decide what was good for you from your energetic body was basically shunted or killed off completely. And you were told who to become in society. And you were asked questions like, what do you want to be when you are going to grow up? Which is another way of saying, like, pick an identity and stick with it, even though you're a completely malleable and evolving human being all the time. And so just over the last few decades, the questions a lot of parents ask, I know certainly I do, I imagine Jason does too, is like, I have a 2.5-year-old. He's got a 1.5-year-old at home at the recording of this video. And it's like, I ask questions like, what did you come here for? Like, my parents didn't ask me that question, right? Like, and that's the question, like, that's what's in the background for me as I observe my child instead of,
who are you, right?
Yeah. Like,
who are you?
So in a way, I don't want to let your parents off the hook for the times that they've violated you. And I want to offer that personal and interpersonal forgiveness is extremely important for healing. And it's like if your parents did that to you, what was done to them was far more atrocious than you can ever imagine. That thousandfold over. And so they were conditioned to be that way. And like Jason said, like they're just playing out their unconscious behaviors on their children, and then their children get to learn from that. And this is how we, at least from our point of view, slowly evolve into more consciousness. And at the same time, I also want to offer that like what has happened since the advent of World War II is an explosion of awakening and growth, where there was really stagnation for thousands of years on this planet. And so we have seen incredible changes, not just technologically, but in terms of our society and how we socially think and how we socially interact with each other. And just like a healing, right? Like I've been in it for 20 years, but now I'm like kind of modulating this scary place that's going back and forth. Like I've spent every day this past week crying, and there it is. It's coming right now because I'm mentioning it. Trying to find my way with like trying to get support from my wife, arguing with my wife because my system doesn't feel safe. Like it feels like some part of my identity that usually knows what to do right now is just not doing it or doesn't want to do it. And so like I'm observing my system basically have a fucking meltdown from a place of it not feeling safe. But it's like I can only learn how to feel safe here by observing, not by doing, not by planning, not by figuring out the next thing. It's like this has its own intelligence how to repair itself. I just get to be patient. That could be days, that could be weeks, this could be months, this could be years. But again, sorry, I'm starting to cry a little bit. What I'm saying is I'm invested for the long haul. Like I finally realized not to run away from the heartache, not to run away from the fear, not to run away from the sadness. I built enough, it's not strength. I built enough stability in my system to be with what I could never be with before. And to me, that's the beginning of stopping to suffer. And going from what I call like we've been in a survival model for a long time, and we're now moving to what I call as an evolutionary model. It would take me some time to kind of explain what I mean by that. But evolving has nothing to do with trying to survive anymore. And it has to do a lot with our ability to receive pleasure at very, very high levels, and literally have events organize themselves in the most spontaneous, magical ways around you, where you no longer have to work so hard or try to make it happen. It's just like what matters is your alignment, and then like watch your life turn over, watch this reality, this organic hologram turn over and unfold in ways that are directly connected to that alignment.
Well, you covered a ton of stuff there that some of it is actually very, very profound, and I think may need to be sat with for a little while.
Sure.
One of the things that you mentioned at the end, I think, is so powerful. I want to bring it back to the forefront a little bit because it really ties into what we're talking about, is sort of this idea of being stuck, which is that you mentioned that you're now in a position to finally feel, recognize, allow these deep, deep emotions, these deep experiences, and they go beyond emotions, right? There's energies and there's other things happening, but you're allowing them to move through. And this to me comes back to the core of what we're talking about. This idea of being stuck. Sometimes we don't even know what we're stuck in. Sometimes we don't know that we're stuck until things start to finally dislodge. Sometimes we do. Sometimes we know we're totally stuck, but sometimes we think that everything's great, and then what we're trying to avoid is that uncomfortable feeling, is that emotion, is that ickiness that comes in as we try to judge the experience. And I'm feeling you in this moment of just allowing these, what were once extremely uncomfortable, scary, gross feelings or experiences. You're now able to gain some distance from those, perhaps still judge them, because I think that's probably a
Sure.
natural experience that I share. And yet there's this deeper allowance and a recognition of the beauty of them just being there and flowing through. And I know you've had this experience as well as I have, because we've sort of chatted about these, but there's an appreciation for the sadness, for the anger, for the confusion, even sometimes, right? That once wasn't there. And I think, to me, this gets to the core of what I think is so paradoxical about this idea of getting unstuck, which is that sometimes, not always, but sometimes getting unstuck doesn't feel like what we thought it was going to feel.
Sure.
It feels much worse. And I think you alluded to that at the beginning. And again, that comes from kind of the judgment mind. But rather, this idea of things flowing is really where we want to get to. And I can tell that you have this deep, deep trust in your system that wherever this leads is a good place, and that's where you want to go. And to some degree, the mind doesn't have a clue where that is, right?
Yeah.
And so to kind of recap, maybe just give me this idea, and again, we can kind of keep this short and general, but why do we get stuck, and how do we go about moving through that?
Yeah. So, like stuckness really is a facet of a sensation in your body. Okay. And then we basically have automatic, unconscious protocols that you've learned that were initially strategies that just learned and just kind of habituated themselves over time. Right. And so like if you've ever, just kind of, again, give a metaphor here, if you've ever been in a car and you suddenly find yourself checking out, you weren't really looking, but then like half an hour later, you end up in your driveway and you're wondering how the fuck did I get here? Like I wasn't paying attention. Yeah, you don't even remember driving. Like thank God those systems are there because that's what they allow for. They allow for this living in this reality that actually they are like they don't sleep and they don't eat and they don't ask for anything in return and they just work all the time
for you.
Right? Yeah, they work for you. And so we really want to start building a relationship with this aspect of ourselves instead of trying to mash it, to control it, and to think it's supposed to be what we want it to be. Because guess what? This has evolved over a very long period of time through the intelligence, through the field, through the awareness, and is potent. So people feel stuck because they're running a pattern basically in their system. If you step two, and this is really where training comes into play, is learning how to observe your system without changing it. And just like Jason mentioned, like we all need reminders. Like I need regular reminders. I have teachers I work with on a weekly, sometimes daily basis. And the most simple reminder really is, can you permission that? Like, can you start with permissioning what's happening right now? Another way of saying is, can you love that? And I hear a lot of you go, yeah.
And is there a degree? Because I want to maybe hit that as well, because it's not a black or white, right? There's actually a degree of how much you can allow and how much you can love, right?
Yeah. Like allowing is a cultivation. It is a time. It takes time. Surrendering is something you cultivate. You're not just like, oh, I'm not surrendering. Now I'm surrendering. Oh, I've decided to surrender. Like, that's cool. Like your mind's gonna be like, oh, I can surrender. And your body's like, I can't do that right now, sir. Like it doesn't know how to follow your commands the way that you think it does. But as it relaxes, as you relax and as you cultivate a more fluid system, suddenly you find that it's just a matter of observing, not about understanding. And again, that's a big shift from where we are right now, which is like, we got to understand how it's working. Something with science and germ theory and like everything. We're so scientifically obsessed with understanding every nuance, but I want to offer it's so much more complex and probably more beautiful than we ever imagined possible. And so we want to really understand that our body is already built to have this level of awareness. Our mind is most likely not going to catch up. Right. And so there's a thing about connecting your heart to your mind or your body to your mind and realizing that this is actually informing this, not the other way around. That's why, just to quickly speak here on like gut biology, we know scientifically speaking that your gut sends up 9 signals for every 1 signal your brain sends down. So there's 900% more content coming up than there is coming down. So what's informing what? So if we just continue to live from conditioning over here, what are we actually missing? Which is a whole other realm of another set of perception that we have that where most people are completely numb to or not using at all, which by the way is a way better informant than the 5 senses.
So we're permissioning, we're allowing, we're bringing more love and compassion to these things that are coming up.
Correct.
And then what do we do with that?
Yeah,
that's kind of the end of the line.
I don't know where the end of the line is. It just keeps the line keeps getting drawn further out. But and again, just to that point of compassion, it's like we keep trying to make people believe and think and act like us. But it's like, if we want to see a compassionate world arise, guess what? Like if you can't be compassionate towards your anger or your sadness, when you see sadness or anger around you, You can't be compassionate towards that for other people either. And so we have this way of externalizing our world and trying to work on it versus if you want a transformed planet, the only thing that matters is what's going on over here. Okay. So, and so the third part, kind of what Jason said, is we want to start thinking about healing. It's not just you sitting in a chair. That's an important part of it. And there's certain meditations that you can do that we call active healing meditations that are separate than just you sitting there trying to focus your mind. That's a certain type of meditation, but like you can actively be doing healing work with yourself. Now, in society, we don't live by ourselves, and biologically, humans are built for connection and need it for survival. It's built in, it's caked in. So that's why when we separate people in jails into isolation tanks, it's the worst thing you could do to somebody, right? And we see with homeless people how they have to like create identities to talk to. It's just because there's a biological need for connection. So there is work that we can do, one with ourselves, like one to ourselves. There's work that we can do one to group, right? And then there's like one to world, right? And so there's these like, one to self, one to another individual, and then one to the group, which is like one to world. And so there are kind of these three levels that we all need repair at. And so that's like the last bit. And for most of us, what that looks like, I'm going to say from the intelligence place, but it's a little bit deeper than that, is learning how to ask for support. And this is not just like, hey, can you please help me? Although that's a really good start, because most of us have abolished our ability to believe that we have any interpersonal needs. We continue to work with other people all the time, thinking if we fix their problems, that'll fix my problems. That doesn't work. Try to desperately myself. I've built companies on that premise. And so we want to understand that there's a certain way to approach each one of these. And a lot of you guys who are probably listening to this have probably done a lot of personal development or interpersonal work. And you know, when you come out of an experience that's really big, you're very excited and you're like, oh my God, you got to hear what I did. And you go talk to your spouse or you go talk to a friend and they don't know how to receive you. In fact, by you sharing so vulnerably, it triggers a part in their system and they almost like can't be with you. Like that's too weird, or get the fuck away from me, or they start getting hostile. You didn't do anything wrong, right? That's the first thing to get, is you're trying to share, but like they haven't built the capacity to be with that part that you just built the capacity to be with and share about. And so we want to make sure that when we are sharing ourselves about transformation, about things that are very vulnerable to us, that we're very cognizant to share that in an environment that can receive us. Because if it can't be received, you're going to re-traumatize that part. It's just like when you went to mom and dad and you're like, can you please be proud of me? And you didn't get that feedback. It's like, oh, so now you're all excited. You're opening up and you're not in an environment that's mirroring and reflecting back to you that transformation. It can be kind of shattering and you can almost like re-traumatize yourself. So it's really like, just to put a caps on this, is like slowing down, noticing what's so. Observing what's going on. And honestly, we didn't say this, but like going beneath the layer of what the mind is saying. I'm not just angry. There's a sensation in my body. It's not as simple as why am I angry? Go down to the sensation, right? Then it's like learning to sit with what's going on. And the last piece is getting support from other people. And that last piece gives your system the data, so to speak, that it needed to complete that part of your developmental integration. And once you have that, it's like that piece just goes back to neutral. And then there's like a resting that happens in the body. And it's like you can almost feel a part of yourself authentically that you probably haven't felt since you were a little boy or a little girl.
Wow. That's amazing. So, to really paint the picture here, I just want to recap this because what you said is so important, which is that it sounds like we get stuck because we generally experience something in our past, in our childhood, that we didn't have the capacity to process fully. And so it kind of just gets stuck and we create these false patterns, these identities, these character styles, these programs to keep us safe because we didn't have the resource to fully process that big experience, that the thing that overwhelmed us as a very young being. And so that lives with us until we can finally get resolution. But oftentimes as it's coming up through life, we're denying it. We don't want to feel it. We're avoiding it. We're totally unconscious to it. We're oftentimes really trying to push it down. I can speak that from my own experience. Just get this away from me and kill this thing, right? Distance myself from it. But what you're saying is slow down, actually feel it, notice it, recognize it in the body, and then cultivate this level of acceptance, this level of compassion, this level of love, to be with that authentic experience. And as part of that, we need another being oftentimes to help us bring in that resource for us to fully process, because we never had that, and sometimes we can cultivate that on our own. There's definitely that happens, but so many of these things that we remain stuck in, we haven't had the resource to be able to fully process. So, I mean, it really is amazing what you're saying. It's almost like, if we could relate it to the digestive system, it's like our digestive system wasn't capable of processing this thing that we just ate, and we need to kind of borrow somebody else's digestive juices to fully move it through the system and get rid of it, and process it and integrate it. And in doing so, all of a sudden life changes.
Yeah.
Things start aligning in different ways so that we don't have to try to keep digesting anymore. It's all working like it's supposed to.
Sure. I think like anything else, right? Like a mentor or a teacher is just such a vital part of being human. Has always been a really important thing. We've like kind of, again, conditioned it a certain way through schooling and how we look at authority and stuff like that in society now. But like that's always been part of who we are. And my contention why anybody would want to work with somebody like me or Jason with all his specialty is like you could go figure that out on your own. And that might take you 10, 20, 30, 40 years to do. If you sat with a teacher who's templated these things and could transmit it to your system so that you're starting to notice it very rapidly. Like I see my students get to places in 6 months that took me 15 or 20 years to get to. Why? Because I have the templates. I know how to give them access to it. I know what to point to in a certain experience and be like, hey, did you notice that? And suddenly there's an awareness that opens that has taken me, decades to notice myself through very deep work. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to mention like let's acknowledge first, Guy, you have your own genius and you have your own uniqueness that is there, but also you spent over $500,000, took you 20 some odd years. So it's like, if I can borrow from that and shortcut that process and be like, okay, Guy, you did all the hard work, just
Right.
the good stuff that you pulled out. There's
Yeah.
like a real value in that, right? And that's where working with some teachers and really these teachers can be all around us, right? They can be in our parents, they can be in our siblings, they can be in friends, and spouses and even children, right? To some degree. So they can be found anywhere, and yet there's also tremendous value in seeking out, I think, some of the people that, like yourself and others that are in this space, that they're really dedicating their lives in this way, because there's certain templates that come from actually giving this guidance and coaching other people that you're learning day in and day out, because every experience is a new experience that you're picking up on. So
Correct.
this is amazing, and there's really a lot here. We meandered a little bit, which is beautiful. You covered tons of territory,
Sure.
and yet there's so much to this idea of what it means to be stuck, why we're stuck, how to get unstuck, which I think is very, very different than what most people might recognize. So
Yeah.
I want to thank you for your wisdom and sharing all that.
Can I add one little piece here for everybody?
Yeah, please.
And so like, wherever your impressions are of where we are in the world right now, I wanna offer that there is a lot at stake in terms of the vision of the world that's being given, right? Like if you know anything about news broadcasting, 80% of the marketing that's put behind it is all from the medical community, from insurance companies and big pharma and stuff like that. And so look, they're right or wrong, doesn't matter. They're invested in knowing that creating problems in your life that they can solve. That's what marketing is about, right? And so I want to offer that like there's a streaming of the way reality is. And then there's like the reality as lived. I've traveled the whole world and most of the world looks nothing like what we see on the news. People don't seem like what they are on TV. And so like we are being conditioned to believe that like we're kind of heading for this cliff. But in my experience, like kind of what Jason said, if you can leverage people like me, and I'm not the only one on the planet that's aware of this stuff, guys, right? Like it's a compounding effect, because what's taken me 20 years will take somebody else 2. What took them 2 will take somebody else 1. What took them 1 will take somebody else a month. And so we're moving in this direction of heightened awareness at extraordinarily fast speeds. And I think what's interesting about our lives, if I could say that, is in the past, what has taken generations, hundreds of years to transition, is now happening in a single lifetime. Like we will be the generation that literally saw it move from like one mindset to a completely different psychology paradigm. Blockchain society, call it what you will, decentralized, no state run type of things. That's going to be in our lives. And so it's kind of up to this generation, whatever the hell we are. I don't think I'm like at the cusp of millennials. I'm 37 years old, to kind of really not challenge ourselves, but like become hyper aware, because it's going to be a grave challenge on our part to allow for this shift to happen without creating all the resistance that past generations have to try to hold everything the way that it was, and allow for this new generation that's already coming with this consciousness to flourish and kind of like our soil, so to speak, without holding them back. And so I really want to tell you that like everywhere I look, I see promise. If you look across any statistic on planet Earth, from death rates and violence, like everything has been plummeting for 20 or 30 years now. And so the real picture of planet Earth is that everything is getting better, that there's less poverty, there's more health, like all these kind of things. And so don't let that frame of reality that's built around a certain type of manipulation of people to have you project on what happens out there in the world. Because the more that we remove ourselves from this illusion, connect to ourselves deeply, and realize global transformation is my transformation, it's not me being left behind, we're going to see an even more acceleration the more people that are behind that vision.
Beautiful. And I love what you did there. You probably can look back and recognize, but you did it just from a streaming perspective. You just connected the macrocosm to the microcosm. The same things that you're mentioning there in the macrocosm, that sometimes things look dire, and it's a projection of an old reality, and what we're looking for is transformation. And let's not fight it, let's not resist it, let's not challenge it, but rather allow it and let it kind of dissolve and come at it from a new perspective. This is exactly what we do internally, right?
Totally.
That's how we get the transformation, is not by resistance, not by fighting, not by trying to come at it from the old perspective, but rather allowing this new perspective to emerge, such that this new reality can then present itself, right? And in the midst of that transformation, not to use a cliche sort of metaphor here, but like the caterpillar into the chrysalis, it probably seems very dark and dire and like it's death, but rather there's really a metamorphosis that's happening, and that can look messy and it can feel messy. And so in our own personal experience, that's often the case, right? And this is going back to what you said earlier. It doesn't look like what we thought it would look like sometimes, and yet it's exactly what's required, and it's the exact experience that then allows this new growth to occur. So I think it's beautiful. And again, I just want to acknowledge, Guy, that not only are you advocating for people to sit with experienced teachers and practitioners like yourself, this is exactly what you do, right? So it's not coming from this perspective of come look at me. It's
Sure.
like, this is
Humble.
what I do. I know that this is what works, and I'm continuing to dedicate. I know you are dedicate your life to finding teachers that can help guide you along this path, because I know, just like myself, it's easier. It's just easier that way.
Sure. Be
And,
humble.
and it can be very fun in that process too. So, so again, being one of those guys, I really do appreciate you. And I'm sad that your brother couldn't join us today, because he's a delight in and of himself. He's another guy that carries this wisdom in his own unique way too. And if you get a chance, everybody go check out their stuff at Satori Prime. They do a lot of free coaching. They have a group experience, Old Souls and Seekers, I believe, correct, Guy?
Yep.
That they do on Facebook, and they have some fun. They don't take themselves too serious. Guy looks like a very serious dude, because he's got these like penetrating eyes and square
Sure.
jaw. But if you know him, he's a ball full of play, and you get him and his brother together, and it's sometimes a comedy show that even
That's true.
like, hey, let's get back on track. Let's learn here. So
That's true.
they're totally fun, and I would encourage everybody to check them out. Again, satoriprime.com is where you can find their stuff, and you can find their stuff on Facebook as well. So, Guy, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Love you guys. Thank you for listening.